Welcome, everyone. I hope you can all hear and see me properly. How are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. It is 5 past now, so we have given some time for everyone to log in and join us. And so I'm going to be starting our screen share now. And like I said, if you have questions, please share with us in the chat and we will answer it as we go through. Kenny Maestri will be joining us in the call as we go. And so, yeah, let's get started. I am very excited to have you today joining us. This has been a very important topic for me because as I have been working for 22 years, I started my first job at the age of 17, and this is really something that I wish people had talked to me about. I wish someone had coached me on. I wish someone had supported me and been a guide on my journey. I see some people engaging in the chats. Jennifer saying, glad to be here. We're glad to have you, Jennifer. So if you have any questions along the way, please pop them into the chat box. I will be looking to the left of my screen as we go ahead. And I want to make this a very interactive session. And so as you've seen from the webinar marketing that we've been sharing, I've asked Kenny Maestri to share his insights on this topic. So I met Kenny Maestri about 10, 11 years ago. I actually met my husband at his life group. So he has a very special place in our family. And his journey is very similar to my own journey in terms of finding my voice and owning my voice. And so I have shared in the group, and I will share again in the LinkedIn Messenger as well, the full link to the interview. It's over an hour long, so I don't want to share too much of that here, but there is a full interview with Kenny, and we go very, very deep into how your voice is linked to your identity. And we're going to explore some of those topics today as we go along. So you're here today, and thank you so much for joining me on a Thursday morning. You're here today because you feel like perhaps you've lost your voice. Maybe at some point in your life, you felt like you knew who you were, you knew what you wanted, but then something happened that you weren't expecting, and you felt like because of that traumatic experience, your voice has been lost. Perhaps you're feeling like you're living life for other people and you just keep going along with what people expect you to do, but you're not actually sure if this is who you really are. You're kind of going through the motions and you feel like you're a stranger in your own life. So that if that is you, please let me know in the comments. You also perhaps feel disconnected. You maybe feel disconnected from reality, from your life, from your work, from your friends and family. You just don't know what it is that is making you feel like you're living someone else's life. You feel like you're a fraud. So if that's you, let me know. Or perhaps you just saying you're here today on this webinar because you're saying, Cheryl, I don't know how to speak up. I have a lot to say, but in my life, in my various aspects of my life, I don't feel like I'm able to really share who I am. I don't feel like I'm really able to share my ideas and my passions because I just don't know how to do that. And so, if you identify with any of these statements, welcome today because we've all felt that at some stage in our lives. So, like I've said, please put into the group chat what your expectations are for our webinar today. And I want to get into some really core things. So what we promised to cover today in the webinar is looking into why first generation specifically struggle to find their voice in the workplace. I am a first generation professional myself. I was the first in my family to finish matric, to get a degree, which I studied part-time. I started my first job at 17. And so I didn't have a support group. I didn't have anyone I could go to ask them for advice on how do I connect to my boss? How do I say no when I'm feeling overwhelmed? How do I address things? So I was really entering the world of work in a survival state, and also because of what I was experiencing in a victim state as well. And I think a lot of South Africans start out their lives in that way. And so that is the first thing we want to cover and look at how do we address these things. And sometimes it's just really good to know, okay, I'm not the only one who's feeling this way. And so that's very helpful. And then we're going to look at a case study of the process involved in finding your voice, and that's with Kenny Maestri. So I've got some snippets from our interview that we'll share today. So what we'll be covering as well is how you can find and own your voice. So what are those hidden barriers that are keeping you from owning your voice, and perhaps some tools to support those who are struggling. Now, that's a lot to cover in just 1 hour, and so I'm going to do my best to cover some key concepts that might help you to, number one, have an awareness of what's stopping your voice. And so initially, I just want to bring it to the outset. If you haven't attended a wholeness webinar before at Whole Person Academy, we go very deep into things. So we're not going to just deal with the rational head knowledge things. We're going to be looking into the heart, the hidden stuff, the unconscious and subconscious levels, because we often want to change the behavior. But in order to change the behavior, we have to look at what the core beliefs are. And so we have to look at what are some things that we are believing that is not helpful, because these things actually dictate and determine our values, our attitudes, and our perception. Ultimately, that relates to our behavior. So if I'm going too fast, please stop me. Please leave a message or a question in the chat, and we will slow down and answer your questions. So the first thing is we have to look at what actually affects our voice. What affects our voice? Everyone is born perfect and beautiful and whole. We come into this world priceless. And depending on what family we were born into, the culture, the personal experiences that we've had, our own inherent personality, what we choose to pursue in terms of career path, the quality of our relationships, these things all form our core beliefs. So there's many factors that go into what affects our voice. Why I'm so passionate about this topic specifically is because I grew up with my voice being opposed. So I grew up in a home where there was a lot of domestic violence, and I learned early on that women don't speak. If I tried to speak up, because I knew this was wrong, if I tried to speak up, I realized my voice was dangerous because that could result in my mom getting beaten up again. So that was a very traumatic way for me to encounter trying to practice who I am in the world and my voice. And in high school, I developed a stutter. So I actually couldn't speak because I just felt like my voice was not welcome. My voice was not effective to change things. And so my voice got stuck in my throat. And maybe you can relate to that today. And it's taken me many years, many years of trying to address that, of trying to reclaim my voice, find out who I am, who is Cheryl, and then learn to speak from a place of wholeness and authenticity. So I want to just quickly break here and go into the first snippet that I want to share with my interview with Kenny Maestri. And this one looks at how your identity is linked to your voice. So you can't separate your identity from your voice. So I'll play a 5-minute snippet, and please let me know in the chat that you can hear the sound. We're going to start our recording here, or a snippet from 14 minutes. In the question, what is my message? Who am I connecting with? Am I serving them? And how can people do that authentically, Kenny? I think that's something that people admire about your life, is that you have been able to connect to people over generations. And that's something that people can relate to. So how can young people who are trying to build their personal brands, trying to find their voice and to share their voice, how can they do that authentically?
Now, look, currently I have like 5-year-olds listening to me on similar because of their parents or grandparents, and it goes up to 65, 70, etc. So, how do you talk to the different generations? And you got to keep it real. You got to be affable. You got to be listenable. You got to be somebody that the listener can relate to. And the best way to do that is to be yourself. Because, I mean, if you look at what's happening now with so called influencers, it's very shallow and it's all about using their followers to make money and using their so called celebrity status to drive their empires. And whilst that might be good for the individual, the question then arises, what are you doing with your fame and what are you doing with the money? And if it's just for you and your friends and family to have a good time, then I think you're really diluting the main purpose of all this blessings, if you want to call it that, that you are receiving through the profile that you managed to generate. So if you're podcasting, as an example, yes, do the podcast, get the following, get the advertising from that podcast, generate the income, get the endorsements, but then ask yourself, what am I going to do with that? And so, I mean, if I had to inherit $1 billion tomorrow, how many cars do I really need to buy? Look, I love cars, so I could have a collection of 20 or 100 cars. But the point I'm making is that whether it's 3 cars, 5 cars, or 10 cars, there comes a point where it's enough for you and you decide what is enough.
Kenny, I love that because that's what we teach at Whole Person Academy. We're teaching about alignment between your career, your relationships, your finances. And that also is a result of alignment and harmony in your spirit, soul, and your body, right? So, who are you? Are you a whole person that's actually flowing out with love and peace and grace and hope for people? Or are you trying to get that from a financial goal that you're trying to set? Because when we look at the stats of what's really happening with people in South Africa, even those who are middle to upper income, their debt to income ratios is around 70, 75%. So we saw that with the pandemic, people are living paycheck to paycheck. And if we are drowning in debt, we are actually sabotaging our future. I know this because I was in debt with almost R1 million, paid it off over 4 years, lived debt free. And this is what I teach now because I didn't think at the time when I was living in debt that it was possible to live outside of that. So I think the trap of social media, the temptation, the trap is that we're trying to compare ourselves with people not just in our income bracket, but with people around the world who are in very different economic realities than we are, and we're trying to match that. And like you said, Kenny, the fame is a byproduct of knowing your purpose, understanding who you are. But if that becomes the goal, it can be very shallow. And this is why we see a lot of mental health issues with young social media influencers, because that becomes a drug to live on that approval. And that is short-lived because suddenly there's another personality that's rising up and people unfollow, unsubscribe. And then if that was your identity, that's a very dangerous place to be. So we can see from that snippet that this is something we can't avoid. Your voice is your identity. Who I am in the world is what I will speak out in the world. And so that's what I want to really entrench in here. Because what you're asking me when you're asking the question, how do I find my voice? You're really asking me, do I belong? How can I find a way to belong in the world? How can I find a way to interact with the world, to find my place in the world? That's really what we're asking when we're saying, how do I find my voice? It's how do I find my place in the world? That's really what we're saying. And so if we look at what we've been told, and so story is so powerful because we are wired in story. If I had to meet you for coffee, you start telling me and ask you to tell me about you. You start telling me where you were born, how many siblings you have, where you grew up, what's your likes and interests, things that have affected your life. So we are integrated into story. And so what we've been told for many years is this is our conventional pathway to life. So why am I here? People say, well, you have to do well at school, you have to go to university, you have to get a job, get promoted, get a house, get a car. This is the script we've been given. Get into debt to try to keep up with everybody else around you. Keep getting promoted at work because that's the way for you to pay off your debts. But underneath it all, people who are saying this to us is actually living with constant financial stress. South Africans are some of the most indebted people in the world, and only 6% of South Africans can actually afford to retire comfortably. So this path we've been told to go down is not actually a path that leads us to a place of prosperity, if you think about it, because it's just a path that we said, this is the way life is. This is what you have to do. And so some of the confusion and anxiety we're facing is because we're seeing, but there's something wrong with this picture. And so with the pandemic, what we've seen is that there is no job security because the company that you've worked for 15 years could say to you, I'm sorry, but we are retrenching and you have to leave your job today. And so if we don't make a conscious choice to work harder on ourselves than we do on our jobs, we will face a threat to our identity. We're going to face an identity crisis, and we see that happening all around the world. So the main shift for the new way of working, and this is what I share in all of my training sessions, because I think we don't have a framework, a language for it. And that's so important because if we try to live by story A, and we don't know that other options exist. We're going to feel stuck in story A. But now I realize, well, maybe there's other stories that I can try out and see if it fits into my life. So where we've been told previously that there's a single path to follow, you've heard people say if you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. And now we're shifting into building a portfolio career. So instead of just being an accountant, how can you use your skill sets as an accountant to master multiple crafts? So instead of selling my services or my products to one employer, how do I sell this to multiple clients and customers? And so we can see that in order to thrive in the new world of work, we have to start shifting our thinking. We have to become entrepreneurial and not just have an employee mindset. Because the problem with story A, which is the go to school, go to university, get a job script, is that they are telling you that there's something external that's going to satisfy you. So getting the right job, giving you the right amount of money, is going to make your life just feel like everything falls into place. Getting into the right relationship is going to be what helps you to feel happy. And if you've spoken to anyone who's tried to do that, you'll realize there's a problem with this picture. Even if you've tried to do that, when graduates, and I've worked in higher education for 10 years, getting funding for students to actually complete their studies, once they get into the world of work and they get this job, they think it's a bit of an anticlimax, because you get into a new job and it's awesome to have your first salary, to have money at your disposal, but then you're faced with the realities of work. You go to work to solve problems. So you think, well, I've done all this work to study and get a degree, so life's supposed to be easier. And that's the biggest thing that causes us to feel afraid, to feel like we've lost our voice, to feel like we don't belong. When we feel like there's something wrong with me because this is the way I'm supposed to feel fulfilled and it's not fulfilling. So there's a gap that we don't know how to really articulate, because actually, when you understand with maturity and experience that any amount of money is not going to make me happy. It's what I bring. It's how I actually approach my money that will be meaningful. It's what I bring to my job that's going to actually help me to grow. How can I help to solve a problem? How can I be of value in this space? So it's not about what you can take from a relationship or a career or finance. It's about what you bring to that space. And that's a major, major shift, because everything, all the messages around us are telling the total opposite. And so it's taken me many years, like I said, 22 years of understanding that if my personal relationships are in chaos, if I didn't learn how to speak up because I grew up in an abusive environment, I didn't know, I didn't realize at the time, my 20s, that when I went into the world of work, I was going in as a victim. So victims don't feel like they have a voice. Victims don't feel like they can speak. They just become people pleasers. They're addicted to approval. They work too much. They work too hard. They complain about things because they don't feel like they have autonomy in their lives. So that personal relationship affected directly my professional relationships. So let me know in the chat if that's you, if you are understanding, or if you are relating to any of the things that I'm sharing with you today. Let me know if you are struggling in the area of your personal relationships and you seeing how it has an effect on your professional relationships. In terms of your career development, if I don't know that I'm valuable, or I don't know that I have great skill sets, I'm going to keep expecting the next job to give me that. Or if only I get a better boss or a better manager, then I'll be happy, then I'll be okay. So a wholeness, what I could now call the wholeness triad, is I want to build harmony in my personal relationships, because if I can start speaking up in my personal relationships, start having better boundaries in my personal relationships, that's going to help me to be a more assertive person in my career, in my workplace. And if I'm more assertive and more confident, that's going to have a direct link to how much money I'm able to earn, or feel I can actually earn or deserve to earn. So do you see how these things are interlinked? So let me know in the chat if you feel like there is something that you can identify with, because ultimately, this is the great battle, isn't it? We've been told, okay, you have to be rational, you have to think logically, you have to find a career path that will get you money, but maybe your heart is not into the thing that you studied. I've seen this many, many times with graduates. They study something because they got a bursary for it, or it's what their parents wanted them to do, but their heart was in something else. And that's not entirely a bad thing. It's good to acquire knowledge, and it's good to acquire a skill set that you can use in the world that you can actually get an income from. But what you want to try and do in order to be whole, in order to get more harmony, to feel like your voice is strong, you want to start building wholeness between your head and your heart. You want to start building synergy between your head and your heart. So, how do I, in my relationships, career, finances, get my head and my heart to work together? Bringing your passion with your abilities. How do you bring those two together? And that's really important. So, right now, I just want to pause here and I want to ask you to do some self reflection. I want you to think about what are the major factors influencing my voice as of today. Think about your life the past week, the past month, the past year. What has affected your voice the most? Has it been your parents? Has it been the news? Has it been your family? Has it been your coworkers? What are the major influences in your life at the moment? If you feel brave, you can share that in the chat, or you can just write it down in your own personal reflection via notebook or something. But write something down for me there, because I want this webinar to be interactive and not just giving you information, but really allowing you to connect with these concepts and see how it applies to your own life. So, what aspects of cultural and societal expectations do I feel most pressure to conform to? So, as you're thinking about who has been affecting my voice the most over the past year, what have these voices via cultural or societal expectations telling me that I need to do, telling me that I need to become? So, I'm going to give you just a minute or two to think about that, and I will check in on the chats. I see that we have Kenny Macy who's joined the call. Welcome, Kenny. Okay, so Pumi was sharing in the chat that what's been most influential in terms of her own life is her own internal voice. And I asked her, what is her internal voice saying? And she says, being available to everyone, family, children, colleagues. I hear you with that. I think we all put other people first. So, in the second part of the series, the webinar, what we wanted to go over is just case studies in finding a voice. So, sharing some of my story, sharing some of Kenny's story, and hopefully you'll be able to relate to some of that. But in finding your voice, you need to have awareness. So, this is what we're trying to do in sharing this with you today is what are the factors influencing your voice? When we talk about voice, we're talking about identity. If there's been things in our lives that has caused us trauma, and in South Africa, unfortunately, we all have that in common at some stage of our lives. How do I find a way to heal that and take back my power again? I have to be intentional about it. So, what is my purpose here on this planet? I know that maybe people have given me information and messages around this, but what do I feel is my greatest call in life? How do I get the support I need, and how do I practice that voice? So, I've learned that finding your voice involves the process of finding your identity. As you become intentional about discovering your true self, it becomes easier to activate your voice. So, I relate to what you're saying, Pumi. I grew up with the idea that I was here to serve people. So I would try and do whatever I could. I was very self-sacrificing, but at some point I resented that because I felt like I was losing a part of myself and I wasn't able to gain that from serving other people. Jennifer says, I think I've been affecting my voice because of timidity. As a first year master's student, also from a different country, there's a lot here to realize I need to catch up with, and sometimes it feels a bit depressing. And sometimes it makes me question if I'm studying the right program. Jennifer, I think we should have a chat online about that. But I've been doing some work with some postdocs recently, and it was fascinating to see this amazing group of people who have skill sets and like if anyone had to be in a room with them and be audited how much they know, they still feel a sense of inadequacy. So it's common that we feel like an imposter in our own lives. And so we have to interrogate, where are these lies coming from? Why do we feel this way? I just actually want to not play this snippet because we have Kenny on the call. So I want to use this opportunity to ask him to unmute Kenny if you don't mind. And I want to ask you the question, Kenny, if we feel like we are stuck what can we do? Because what Apumi is saying here is that we are people pleasers, and Jennifer is saying, I'm not sure if I'm on the right path. So, Kenny, can I ask you to unmute? Let me find
Yeah,
you.
good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you. In terms of studying something that you shouldn't be studying, I spent like a better part of 8 years studying a 3-year degree, a Bachelor of Science degree. I had no business studying it. I should have done a BA in marketing and communication. But be that as it may, whilst I was doing the BSc, I was also on campus radio, and that's basically where I focused more on developing the talent and pursuing a commercial radio career. So even though I was studying the wrong thing academically, practically I was getting experience being on campus radio. But I mean, studying is not cheap. University fees are not cheap. So I think it's important to find something that you're good at, or it doesn't have to be 10 or 15 things. It could just be one or two things, and see how that ties into your life and how you can expand on that. It doesn't have to be a 3-year or 4-year degree. It can be a certificate. It can be a diploma. It could be hands-on experience. But everybody's looking for an academic qualification to back up the practical experience. So I guess you have to study at some point. And even just doing short online courses for life skills, etc., that will just put you in good stead in terms of a team dynamic, working with other people. In terms of finding time for yourself, I mean, look, at the end of the day, you need to prioritize your time management and yourself in that time management, because it's so easy. And I think especially with women, that whole approval addiction plays heavily on the hearts of women. I think because of your nurturing, the way you wired to be nurturers, it just, there's a whole lot of guilt tripping and shaming that takes place when you don't step up and be there for everyone else. But the point is, you need to basically put yourself first at times, because if you're not good, if you're not growing and developing, how can you be supportive of other people who need advice from you? So there are times where you'll have to put yourself first, but it's how you manage your time.
Thank you so much, Kenny. Jennifer, I hope that's answered your question a little bit, and Pumi as well. And if you need to reach us after the webinar, you're welcome to reach out as well. So how do I find my voice? This is the part where we have to cover the questions of who am I and why am I here? And what I have discovered, and also in our discussions with Kenny, you'll see in the interview that you have to integrate your spirit, your soul, and your body. So it's not just about who you are in terms of what you do, because if we're just getting stuck in who we are because of, there we go, let's continue. So yeah, we have to look at ourselves holistically. So spirit, soul, body is integrating who we are. And you can definitely find these questions, answers to your existential questions via your faith. So whether you believe in whatever you believe in, you have to find a way to integrate your spiritual life with your other aspects of your life. And that's how we start to filter out other voices. Because if we are only looking for information from the outside in and not from the inside out, we are going to really struggle in life as well. So, what do I have to say is also important. How do I speak so that I am heard? These are the things that we have to be intentional about reflecting and asking ourselves about: how do I find my voice? Because ultimately, what you're trying to get to is your authentic self. And in the interview that I did with Kenny, I love what came across to you is that the things you chase always eludes you. So whether it's the job or the promotion or the relationship or the money, if you chase those things, it will just kind of fly away. But when you start getting comfortable with who you are and knowing your identity, then all the things that you used to chase, they flow to you. And it's a very kind of big thing to unpack here, but I just want to share this because, in trying to pursue an academic career and then trying to find our way in the world of work, if we try and follow these conventional pathways that others have laid out for us without questioning if they fit us, that's where we get frustrated. That's where we get in fear. And that's where we start feeling like we don't have a say and we start feeling like we're stuck. So, Is fear stealing your voice? Reasons that your voice could be silenced could be many, many things. But if you feel like you're being silenced, perhaps Pumi was sharing as well that she felt like she's giving herself away to other people and saying yes and yes and yes to everybody else, but she's not giving herself time to really honor what she needs to build on. And so some of the things that we can feel like, why should I even speak up? Because we see all this political noise and we feel like our voice can't actually affect any change. So what's the point of speaking up if it's not going to change anything? Okay, so we believe the lie that our voice is not powerful. Again, social media makes us maybe want to hide because while we can maybe share our voices on social media, there are other aspects of it becomes a way for us just to shout at people and not engage in healthy conversations. And in the interview I had with Kenny, he unpacks it a bit more of how you can actually be heard in a healthy way. But the social media noise makes you feel like, do I even want to play in this space? There's so much going on there. And as much as it's there to help us to have a platform, we have to be very, very intentional and very clear about how we'll be sharing our voice. And my key here, my little tip is before you post something on social media, via Twitter, Instagram, or whatever it is, or YouTube video, have you practiced this opinion or have you spoken to someone else that you know, a friend, about your opinion? Because it can get very twisted on social media. There's no nuance there. You're reacting to someone else's quote or opinion, or you having an opinion about something, but people don't have context. And so because of that, we have to be very careful about how we present ourselves in a public space. And perhaps number three, this is also something that was shared in the chat. Perhaps you're feeling like your voice is muted because you feel like an outsider. Maybe it's because you are not in your country of origin, or you feel like because of what's happened to you in the past that you're a victim and you're not worthy of good relationships. I felt like that for many years of my life. And so you can feel isolated. So there's many factors that can come into play. And if you have experienced something that you feel has really impacted your voice, you can share that in the chat as well. Jennifer says, thank you. You have answered her question. That's awesome, Jennifer. So here's the four responses to fear. Now, we always talk about the first two. Everyone knows fight or flight. So if we are fearful about something, we can either fight, and some people are kind of more prone to being kind of generating conflicts, or we can just flight, like leave the conversation, run away. But there's also the freeze and the fawn response. So we just keep quiet. And perhaps we're keeping quiet because we feel like we can't say anything, or we're afraid if we do say something, other people are going to get hurt, like I did when I was growing up in a violent home. But the fourth response is to fawn. So fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And to fawn means to um, continually appease somebody else. So I think for me, this is probably where you're fitting in here and where we can also identify with that. At some point in our lives, and especially when we're growing up, if we felt like we didn't have power in our own lives, we would try and make people happy. We learned how to navigate difficult emotional relationships by figuring out how to keep people happy. And while there was a coping mechanism for us when we were growing up, we take that into the workplace. So our boss says, take on this project. And we know that it's going to be difficult because we have other things to do, but we just say, okay. Or we don't feel like going out on a weekend, we want to just rest, and we get an invite from a friend and we say okay, because we're scared to lose that relationship. And so if you don't have a very strong sense of self and strong healthy boundaries, we can actually default into fawning, to keeping other people happy, but feeling like our voice is being compromised over and over again. And give that a few years, and you're going to start feeling like you're not in charge of your life at all. So I just want to talk here about, I'm going to share this snippet from our interview with Kenny about how do you speak up if you are afraid? I asked him specifically here, like if you're in an office setting and you're in a meeting and you want to say something, but you're scared because perhaps your cultural upbringing has told you you don't look people in the eye, and you don't speak up to your elders, and you don't challenge or confront things. And so these hidden barriers can keep us from actually owning our voice and speaking, because we maybe feel like our voice is not necessary. But if you're in a team, in a family, you are valuable. You are important. Maybe no one's told you that, but I'm telling you that today. You are valuable and important, and your voice has power, it means something. So perhaps you sharing an idea can actually change the whole team dynamic. So let me play the snippet from the video. Please leave any comments or questions in the chat and we can discuss it further. What are some of the things that people can do to address the fears they have of stepping out into something that's uncertain?
Look, I mean, the cliche is fear is false evidence appearing real. And this is where you got to deal with the fear, but also be a person of faith. And faith fuels you to push past what is unknown and what may be a fearful situation. So in the case of being addicted to a big paycheck, as an example, because you've built a lifestyle, and I have been through a situation where I just got married, bought a beautiful house, and then within 6 months I lost this job and 80% of my income. I went from 3 vehicles to no vehicle. I had to borrow my dad's car, and eventually I bought a VW Beetle that had oil leaks and whatever, and I was unemployed at the time, etc. So I've learned how to downscale, and that's the toughest thing for anybody. It's easy to upscale and to go boss because now suddenly you got access to this money. But when you've lived comfortably and you only shop at Willie's, darling, you don't buy any other food from any other grocery shop, or you buy certain labels, and these things start to define you. And now suddenly you've got to give up this lifestyle, and it is scary. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I've been through it a few times in my life, but all I can say is that you will survive. And if it means fasting or having boiled eggs and toast for lunch and supper or whatever, you will do what you need to do to get through the day and to get through that season that you're going through. And so I've had times where to make things work, I had to cut back on socializing. I mean, especially post-divorce, because not only did I go through a divorce and all of those things and having to pay maintenance, I also took a significant pay cut. So I had to make things work within what I was earning at the time, and there were no gigs and stuff, no extra income. So I had to just adjust. And throughout my life, I've learned to adjust to abundance and to lean time. So I'm just saying, don't be scared. If you have to walk away from that paycheck, trust God, He will open doors for you. It may not happen on this timeline and in the way that you expect it to, but just trust the process and grow in that process. And it's always an opportunity to reconnect with yourself. If you're not socializing too much because you can't afford to anymore, now it's time for you to pick up your Bible, or pick up your Bhagavad Gita or your Quran, or whatever faith you're of, or whatever inspires you. Take up that literature and read it and be inspired by it and grow. Do a bit of self-reflection, because all of these things can be a distraction and it can impede your growth and stifle your growth. So lean times are good. You learn to do a bit of introspection.
Lean times are good. This is something we don't see or hear often, right, Kenny?
Yeah.
So there's also just some things that came up in our sessions with Kenny, is that money is an amplifier of who you really are. So often we're scared to talk about things that are affecting us in the workplace because we're scared to lose that paycheck. We're scared to lose that job. Jennifer thought it was very insightful. And so what we want to encourage you here is to try and kind of get a bird's eye view on your life. Often we are focusing on living and responding to the external environment, but this is why we're encouraging you to tap into your spiritual power, your spiritual reality. If you have a higher purpose for your life, and if you research all the successful people that we admire, they have that. The tenacity and resilience comes from a sense of there's something bigger at play than myself. And so if I lean into that and I trust that and I work with that, then I can live a life of purpose. So how do you help others to find their voice? We're going to be ending up the webinar shortly here, but as you are finding your own voice and finding out what your purpose is and finding out what your calling is, finding your place in the world, you start to become more inclusive. You start to have more empathy and compassion, and you can start championing others. When I worked in different teams, we would sometimes have student assistants and student interns working there. And because everyone was always busy with stuff, they kind of didn't give them the time of day often. But I would make I would make time to talk to them about what are they trying to grow in their experience, give them tasks that actually would give them good experience, and just pay attention to people and really listen. So, in terms of finding your voice, it's about finding the people as well that you can connect to, that are safe people, that you know if you go to them, they are healthy, they want you to grow, they are invested in your success. So, in order to find those kind of people, you should become one yourself. Be the kind of friend that you wish you had. There are so many people who feel alone and disconnected. And we've seen with social media, we hear this all the time, that although we can get a WhatsApp, or we like someone, or we say happy birthday to them on Facebook, people are feeling like they are isolated. So take some time to really pay attention and really listen to people, because finding your voice is a journey. If you watch that full interview with Kenny, you'll realize that in his own experience, he started finding his voice when he was on campus. But it's taken him many years to articulate that through his different experiences, finding out who he was. I had to understand all the voices in my own head that was telling me I was not worthy, I was not good enough. Often we attract partners that confirm the internal voice in our head. So if we feel like we are unlovable, we are undeserving, we are useless, we will unconsciously be drawn to people who will echo those beliefs. But once we start getting healthy for ourselves, so what shifted for me in finding my own voice is going to a counselor, starting to talk about the things that affected my life, and her challenging me to not live as a victim anymore. Because even though things happen to us, when we're an adult, we can start to shift those things. We don't have to just live by the stuff that's happened to us. We can overcome that, and we can start to shift out of brokenness into wholeness. And I am very passionate about that, because for my whole life I felt like I was broken, which was disconnected to my life. I felt like I was powerless. I felt like there were so many external things against me. But once I started realizing, okay, maybe there is a God who is actually loving. Maybe my life is actually worth something. Um, I was able to start shifting that and getting around people that help to support me in that journey. Joseph Campbell says we must be willing to let go of the life we planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. And so I think often we get stuck because we feel like life should go in this direction, but we don't realize that actually when I go to work, whatever job it is, and when you start working, you start seeing that this is how I can determine whether or not I can actually grow in this position. Often when we look at a job, we think about what can we get in terms of what can the job give me, but we should be asking, who can I become in this role? Can I address my fears of speaking up? Will this role push and challenge me to become the person that I want to become? I see a question here, and before I get to continue on this, because I'm scared we'll run out of time, Pumi is asking, during your time of self-reflection, how do you deal with the phases of grief? Losing your job, going through the divorce, making up for what you'd lost. Kenny, I think that's a very good question to answer before we end the webinar. So if you wouldn't mind unmuting again.
Yeah. So in 2017, I mean, not only did I go through a separation and then eventually a divorce in January of 2018, but my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. On the day we found out his results, the confirmation that he was actually, diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in his prostate, was the day my ex-wife decided to ask for a divorce. I lost one of my jobs, lost one of my dogs. I can write a country song and have a hit with that. So a lot was unfolding at the time. And, all I can say is because of my faith and my walk with Jesus, it certainly helped me. I'm not saying that, that's the only methodology or only way to deal with whatever challenges you face, because in the natural, as much as I had that support from God and from reading the Bible and praying, etc., I also had the support of a family member who's a postgraduate student in psychology. In fact, she's doing a PhD. So, we've walked a journey together, and sadly, she's going through a divorce now. So I'm helping her to get perspective and that kind of thing. But yeah, you need a family member or a friend, support group to help you through that, because even on the periphery, some of my old varsity mates were people that I would just, have conversations with, and just offload a bit. I think the key is not to get caught up in the emotion. and anger or bitterness because of loss.
That's very
So, for
difficult
example,
because it's very hurtful emotionally. It's a major,
yes,
major loss.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's almost like you've got to say, okay, I know I'm going through these emotions. It's heartbreaking, whether it's losing a job, a pet, a family member, or even a divorce, or taking a significant pay cut. There is a loss involved, and
Mm,
we as human beings do grieve. But the difficulty is when we give into that grief, and because grief can be a very seductive, feel-good emotion, crying can be quite nice when you're going through the crying. But at the end of the crying, you just feel more empty. And I fortunately was able to catch myself and focus on, okay, this has happened. How do I deal with it? And I think maybe guys, because we're more sort of on the logical, scientific side, we might find it easier. I'm not sure whether applies to all guys, but for me in particular, let's just say that I've always been a very logical thinker, analytical thinker, and I had to ask myself, okay, I'm experiencing this emotion, experiencing this loss and grief, but how do I deal with it? What do I need to do to get back to being normal again? And that was a journey. And I had the help of, like I said, this family member and my other buddies from university who sort of helped me and held my hand during that journey. So it's good to have a support structure, but it starts with you being, self-reflective, doing a bit of introspection, because in terms of the divorce, I had to come to terms with my contribution to that unhealthy marriage, which eventually led to a divorce. In as much as it's always easy to point fingers at the other person, a relationship involves two people. It doesn't involve just one person messing up. I think each person needs to step up and say, okay, that was my portion of the blame, and you deal with your portion of the blame. Not everybody's willing to do that, unfortunately. But in my case, I was certainly willing to do it because I knew I needed to grow from the experience. When it came to the job cuts and losing that salary, there it was purely based on faith and His grace. I knew that God will open doors for me, and He did. So it's hard though, especially when you got bills to pay, school fees to pay, etc., rent or a bond, car payments, etc. But like I said in the interview, you got to learn how to dial it back, live within your means. Sell what you need to sell, downscale if you have to, but you make the paycheck fit your lifestyle, or make your lifestyle fit the paycheck, actually, the reduced paycheck. When it comes to losing a pet, it's kind of like losing a family member. So there's all that emotions there. Some people go out and get a new dog. In the case of divorce, especially with men, they don't like to be alone. So in terms of a relationship and getting divorced, I mean, guys go out and they sow their wild oats, because they don't want to be alone.
mm.
And it was very tempting to do that, but I've chosen not to. Not to say that I hadn't let some of my frustration out, I did, but those were short-lived experiences, didn't amount to much of a relationship. And that's when I got to a point where I realized, oh man, you can't be doing this. Rather just be single, focus on my relationship with my girls. And, I've sort of found a rhythm and I'm happy with where I am, even though I am single. But this whole thing of the self journey, the introspection, the growth, and coming out on the other side of a divorce, healthier and a better human being. Because for me, that is more important than me just crying and feeling depressed.
And I love, Kenny, what you shared there because it actually just talks about if you have a strong faith, a strong sense of self, then whatever life throws at you, you're still able to overcome it. So thank you so much for answering that question. I appreciate that. We are almost done. We are going to be maybe just going over 5 minutes, but Pumi is very grateful for that, Kenny. So thank you so much for sharing that. In our training sessions, coaching sessions, we help you to find your sweet spot in life to say, what is the work that makes me come alive? And once because work is meant to be energizing and fulfilling. And so when we start looking at what can I be the best in the world at, what am I deeply passionate about, and what can I get paid for to do? So there's going to be problems and challenges all the time. But if you have a strong sense of identity, you will be able to be strong and face the challenges that comes your way, as Kenny has been sharing. Jim Rohn says the major value you get in life is not what you get, but who you become. So to try and summarize what we've been talking about is finding your voice means finding out who you are. Who am I? Why am I here? Answering these questions that are deep, deep, deep in our hearts that actually need to be answered in order for us to have a meaningful life. And so we want to help you to live, love, and work from a place of wholeness. And so for this webinar, what I'd like to offer you is a special discount on our coaching package. It'll help you to discover what we've been talking about is why am I here? How can I align to my authentic self? And normally it would be about 2,500 Rand for this package, but it'll be for the next 7 days. And I'll share the information with you as well over LinkedIn. A package for 1,000 Rand. And I've been doing these coaching sessions with mid-career professionals, women in their mid-30s, men in their in their mid-30s, who are in their mid-career thinking, where's my life going? How can I build legacy? And so we use this as a framework we call it the purpose matrix, to discover what is the thing that I'm here for. Because once you know that, it helps you to say yes to things. It helps you to say no to things. And you actually have a sense of power, like you know why I'm here. Annalise, this is her testimonial. I won't go through all of it, but she says that it helps her to connect the dots to remember who she was again and to find the next step forward. So often, this is what coaching helps you to do. It helps you to figure out this is what I've always wanted to do, and this is how I can now take the next step. So I will share more information with you about that. If you want to get in contact with me, here's my details. I will share this with you as well via LinkedIn, so you have our details. If you also want to reach out to Kenny, he is available for DJ bookings and MC gigs as well, and you can get him at kennymaestri@gmail.com, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So I want to close on time because I want to respect your time. If you have any comments or last questions, please pop it into the chat. Otherwise, if you have to go, I understand that. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us. Do you have any final thoughts, insights you'd like to share?
Thanks, Cheryl. No, I'm good, but thank you for the opportunity to be on this platform, and I hope that whatever was shared was of some benefit to whoever's on the webinar.
I think what is coming out to Kenny is that you have to do your own webinar or at least host your own session. Or host your own session because it's very valuable. So thank you again for your time, Kenny, and for the time for the interview. And thank you everyone who joined us today. I appreciate it.